But when I left Ukraine, my battalion commander said, Malcolm, there's a lot to do here. Stay here. And I said, listen, you are the eastern wall of democracy, and you are holding it. But I have to go home because the western wall of democracy, the United States, is under attack. I'm here to report today that wall has fallen. Yesterday, Donald Trump directed his ambassador to the United Nations in a routine annual event where a United Nations resolution, a resolution which denounces the Russian invasion of Ukraine and calls on nations to stand for freedom. We've signed it every year. It's de rigueur. He ordered her to vote with Russia. The United States would not denounce Russia's invasion of Ukraine and would not stand for freedom. I am disgusted with this person sitting in the Oval Office, in the place where a real president of the United States would sit. I am disgusted with the fact that I dedicated my life. My family has dedicated 152 continuous years of military service to protect, defend, and uphold the values of this nation, the Constitution, and the belief that America is a better nation, is a beacon for all other nations that want to live with freedom in their breast. Yesterday, America officially became part of what I wrote in my 2017 book, The Plot to Destroy Democracy. I wrote that Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin aspired to create an axis of autocrats. And yesterday, the United States officially joined the axis of autocrats. At the same time that he was denying in the White House, next to French President Emmanuel Macron, that Russia even invaded Ukraine and that Ukraine started the war, he announced that he would be looking into economic transactions with Russia, which means he's about to lift the sanctions and save Russia, which means the United States will be aligned with a ex-KGB officer's dictatorship, and many of you who are former military.
Now think about this. This is Malcolm Nance, right? And he's obviously extremely, fused right now about this situation, right? And I agree, right? Those of you that don't know who Malcolm Nance is, you should Google him and look up his extensive career in service to the U.S. military. Right now, here's the thing. Do you think, because I'm asking MAGA folk here, and anybody else, do you think lifting sanctions against Russia is going to improve the U.S. GDP, improve the economy? I mean, what would that really, that's like a blanket personal favor from Donald Trump. It couldn't be any clearer, and my whole thing is like, where's the Epstein stuff? Don't people want to know? Don't people want Donald Trump to release that? He seems to think, it seems like he's the one that the Epstein stuff is really centered around. If you really think about it, really think about it, espionage, right? Does Epstein have something to do with it? He died in a New York jail, and Donald Trump was the president.
Who swore oaths to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. You voted for him to do this. You officially set the United States on the path to dictatorship. I am disgusted with you. I am disgusted with anyone that supports the values of this.
See, I don't think a lot of people understand yet what this means with authoritarianism in the United States and aligning that way. I don't think a lot of Americans they don't understand what that means regarding the rights that they used to have. So they used to have freedom of speech protected under the law. They used to have you used to have means and ways of acknowledging discrimination, racial discrimination, and other forms of discrimination within the law, right? Programs meant to offset that, right? They used to have protections like a federal government that would investigate hate crimes. Yeah, that all that stuff is being dismantled. They used to have a media that could report freely on the issues. They didn't have to like the president or be with his agenda to report on it to be allowed in the room or in the White House. I mean, these are the rights that were guaranteed, that are guaranteed in under the Constitution, which are being stripped from people right now while criminals are taking over. While criminals and others aligned with those criminals, governments are taking over right now in the United States.
Person. I will not use the word man. This is not a man. This is a mad, power-hungry, authoritarian dictator. And if I can quote the words of General Milley, which is sitting right on I have a 9-foot banner on my front lawn. We did not swear an oath to a tribe. We did not swear an oath to a king. We did not swear an oath to a queen. We did not swear an oath to a nation. We swore an oath to the Constitution.
All right, as you can see,
along with our European and international partners, just walked out.
The UN delegates walked out.
Deputy Foreign Minister spoke.
Walked out on Russia's speech, and this is this was what the gathering was about, to pass some sort of condemnation of Russia or agreement, demand that Russia stop attacking Ukraine. And the United States, for the first time, went against its own set agenda, which would be to protect democracies, right? In this case, and also condemn Russia for violating treaties. In this case, the United States stood together with Russia, with China, with North Korea, with it's Iran probably, right? Also, it is crazy. And so this is right now international and national crises of authoritarianism. Criminal authoritarians are taking over the United States of America.
As the Russian Deputy Foreign Minister spoke, because we stand with Ukraine and we stand in favor of a just.
They walked out on Russia's speech, and we're going to hear some speeches.
Along with our European and international partners, just walked out of the Human Rights Council as the Russian Deputy Foreign Minister spoke, because we stand with Ukraine and we stand in favor of a just and enduring peace in line with the UN Charter and with international law.
But beyond that, there is a question for the entire world. If we let slide what happened with Ukraine without reacting, without saying to which point that what Russia did.
Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin are going to create a Cold War. They're already doing it. And they're going to shake down it doesn't matter if you were with Russia or with the United States. What's going to happen now is they're going to shake down all those people that depend on Russia or depend on the United States. They're going to create a situation where lawlessness prevails so that they can make some money. I mean, it's the obvious play. And this is what people mean when they say, do you want to fight authoritarianism, fight fascism, fight fight dictatorships and things like this? Or are you for democracy of vote? And we know that the United States is not clear on if they're for voting, because there's like 80 million Americans that don't even vote. I mean, who on any presidential election? So who are those Americans? Then there's the low turnout and also the voter suppression, largely, that reduces the votes. I mean, is that going on in the rest of these Western countries or other countries? Is it as bad there in other countries? Actually, no. I don't even think it's economics. It's clearly a matter of, do you take the vote, the right to have a voice? Do you take that seriously or not? How strong of an element is that in the society, the voting, each person voting? What does that have to do with social rights and social benefits, health care, education? What is that? What does democracy and voting have to do with that? Well, that's how you make the laws work for you. It has everything to do with your voice. Your situation, your tax dollars should help your people like you also.
Is unacceptable. We would open the door to a disintegration of fundamental principles on which the United Nations was founded.
Yeah, this has been quite an
Russia
amazing
is an existential
day.
threat, not only to Ukraine, not only to Europe, but to the entire democratic world. And the victory of Ukraine, the outcome of this war in Ukraine, will define our common future and the future of entire democratic world.
Do you want a world where nations are now essentially industrialized nations are in an environment where lawlessness goes on? I mean, what is that? This is essentially a complete realignment, and that's not good for people that are in Western democracies. The United States, particularly, that's not good for the United States, but that's not good for any quote unquote democracy, Western democracy, particularly. I mean, the US is literally about to put under Donald Trump, about to put Western democracies behind dictatorships, like literally. Let's see here. Hold on.
Obviously, nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. And if we participate in any talks, there should be bilateral talks with Russia. There should be present EU, there should be present US, maybe other stakeholders. So the principle, nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine, but also nothing about Europe without Europe, because Ukraine is part of Europe. And of course, it is extremely important to remember that Ukraine will never compromise its territories. We will defend our country. We will defend our sovereignty. This is our home. This is our country. This is our family.
Yes. So that's been the hearing. So loads of people walked out on Russia's speech, and I'm going to play a little bit of the Russian speech just to give people an idea. But this is a little bit from the UN. Let's see here. Of course, it's going to open up with
its 20th plenary meeting. Members will recall that in its resolution ES-11/6 of the 23 February 2023, the Assembly decided, and I quote, to adjourn the 11th emergency special session of the General Assembly temporarily and to authorize the President of the General Assembly to resume its meetings upon request from member states, end of quote. In this regard, I should like to draw the attention of delegations to document A/ES-11/119, which contains a letter dated 17 February 2025 from the representative of Poland and Ukraine to the United Nations, addressed to the President of General Assembly, requesting the resumption of the 11th Emergency Special Session.
All right, I'm going to skip through this and get right to
10.
the
President.
Ukrainian. Here we go.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, distinguished colleagues, Your Excellencies, this is a moment of truth, a historic moment not only for Ukraine, a historic moment not only for Europe, a historic moment for the entire democratic world. And the way we answer to the Russian aggression today, the way we answer.
You know, it's so interesting how just 4 years ago, Americans were thinking just like she was thinking. Yeah, Ukraine has a lot to do with democracy. Yeah, we need to defend democracies also. And especially places where we trade with, you know, and have agreements with already. Right. And now, because the people didn't vote for that, they voted for something else, you know, out of the few people that did vote it, they decided to go another path. They didn't see democracy as being an issue, and democracy now is a threat in their own country, within the United States itself. And I hope Americans get it now. I hope the MAGA folk get it now, really.
To Russian atrocities and crimes, the way we answer to the aggression as a tool of statecraft will define not only the future of Ukraine, will define not only the future of Europe, it will define our common future, the future of the entire democratic world, and the
It will define the future of the United States.
future of the UN. Are we ready to abide by the UN Charter? Are we ready to protect sovereignty and territorial integrity of states? Are we ready to abide by the principle of inviolability of borders and non-use of force? Mr. President, today marks 3 years from the full-scale invasion by the Russian Federation. 3 years of Ukraine's resistance, 3 years of Ukraine's preservation, 3 years of Ukraine's fight and heroism. But let me recall that the war started 11 years ago in 2014. 11 years ago, Ukraine faced one of the most dramatic and challenging periods in its modern history. While resisting the attempt to impose dictatorship, Ukrainians demonstrated dignity and defended their choice for the democratic future in the family of European countries. While the sovereign choice of Ukrainians
I think people forget Zelensky was just elected. He just became the president when Russia attacked Russia.
posed no real threat to Russia. The Kremlin perceived it as a threat to the imperial and non-colonial ambitions. In Kremlin's world, Ukraine was relegated to the role of a Russian satellite within its sphere of influence. For Russia, a military solution to this imagined threat was always an option. Disinformation, economic warfare, subversive activities, all of this laid the groundwork for the subsequent Russian aggression against Ukraine. And immediately after the victory of the Revolution of Dignity in Ukraine, Russia started its occupation of Autonomous Republic of Crimea and some parts of Donetsk and Lugansk regions.
And I want to remind Americans, you know, I said this before. This moment reminds me of 9/11. A lot of similarities in it. Number one, spying, you know, Russian agents and spies, you know, security breaches within the structural integrity inside of the United States security apparatus. There had been security breaches that are well known, right? They've just been blatant and out there in the open. Generals have been convicted. Spies have been, you know, have run to other countries and released information inside, Pentagon information have released it to, WikiLeaks and all of this other stuff going on, right? Snowden, many different things surrounding 9/11, very mysterious things. But now you see, not too much longer, look at this relationship that Trump has now with Russia. It's very interesting. Disinformation, a lot of disinformation was spread after 9/11, after those attacks. Just immediately, almost like the stuff was prepared. I'm just saying.
Weak international response to Russia's attacks on Crimea, Donetsk, and Luhansk back then led to a full-scale military invasion of my country from the north, east, and south 3 years ago. Russia has plunged the entire world into yet another war, a war totally unprovoked, unjustified, and unlawful, driven solely by morbid geopolitical delusions of the past, and yet the bloodiest war in Europe after the Second World War. And all of us became the targets. Ukraine and Ukrainians, because Russia denies our every right to exist. The world has become a target because Russian missiles do not only strike Ukraine, they also shatter the global security architecture, which 3 years into this invasion remains riddled with gaping holes, much like the country's countless residential buildings destroyed across Ukraine. The United Nations is under attack because Russia attacked every foundation of the UN Charter, blatantly violated the UN Charter and the core principles enshrined in it. Russia wants to replace the world based on international law to the world based on the rule of force. And finally, Russia attacked humanity. Humanity itself is under attack. An unsurprising reality, given that Russia has made medieval cruelty a hallmark of its military strategy against a peaceful neighbor and blackmails everyone with its nuclear weapons. Excellencies, Russia believed Ukraine would surrender. Russia believed Kyiv would fall in 3 days. Russia believed our government would flee. However, Russia miscalculated gravely. 11 years, Ukraine stands firmly and resists. The myth of Russia's military invincibility has been shattered. What was once seen as an unstoppable force has been met with resilience, courage, and determination, reinforced by the unwavering support of the free world. Your solidarity has demonstrated that unity and principles of the UN Charter are stronger than aggression and lawlessness. I want to reiterate our profound gratitude to over 140 member states that have stood with us, including those who have supported relevant resolutions in this hall, to those who provided military aid to Ukraine, to those who provided humanitarian assistance to Ukraine, to those who received our temporary displaced persons, to those who help and continue to help bring our deported children back home, our prisoners of war bring home, and our illegally detained civilians to bring them home. To those who have contributed to the implementation of our Grain from Ukraine initiative, a practical effort to mitigate global food security threats stemming from this war. This war has never been about Ukraine only. It is about a fundamental right of any nation to exist, to choose its own path, and to live free from aggression. If aggression is justified and a victim is blamed for its resilience and a will to survive, then no country is safe. Today, Ukraine fights not only for its own independence, but for a world of nations that are not divided into predators and prey, where no zones of conflict, of influence, and gray zones exist. We're fighting for a world which cannot be divided by another Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. We stand up for the world where the future of a nation cannot be determined by another Yalta conference. Mr. President, 3 years of Russia's full-scale invasion against Ukraine have made it clear that we are dealing with a protected, high-intensity war with extreme levels of casualties and spillover effect, rippled across different areas and continents. Let me stress once again that the UN were formed after the Second World War to prevent future wars and maintain international peace and security. Against the backdrop of ongoing and upcoming peace efforts, the General Assembly should take a pivotal role in determining the basis for the just and lasting peace in Ukraine and in Europe, as well as its standing for sovereignty of all states. A clear message that the vision of comprehensive, just and lasting peace, consistent with the UN Charter that we endorsed in this hall 2 years ago, remains valid and must be implemented without delay already this year. However, reducing the Assembly's position to merely stating that this desire is not enough.
The Russian rep is coming right after her.
We need to reconfirm that the aggression should be condemned and discredited, not rewarded. Our position must include substantive elements and ensure that any future peace initiatives aligns with the principles of the UN Charter. This is the rationale behind the draft resolution that I have the honor to introduce today on behalf of the broad group of co-sponsors. My delegation moves that after hearing the introduction of all the L documents, the Assembly immediately proceed to the consideration of our draft resolution A/ES 11/L10 on the understanding that the debate would resume immediately after action on the draft resolution and that the 11th emergency session would be only temporarily adjourned after the conclusion of the debate. We need clear guidance, not just silence, weapons, temporality, not just ceasefire, but to achieve a solution which is just, comprehensive, and sustainable. A solution that guarantees that there will be no repetition of what happened 3 years ago on February 24th, 2022, neither in Ukraine nor elsewhere. For us, for Ukraine, the path is clear. The only way, as our President Volodymyr Zelensky has stated, to ensure comprehensive, just and lasting peace is to reaffirm our commitment to the UN Charter and to agree that the principles enshrined in it, the principle of sovereignty and the principle of territorial integrity of states within its internationally recognized borders, must serve as the foundation.
You know, I'm curious, what people think about the idea of a third world war, beginning with Ukraine. Because unexpectedly you have this shift, right? No one expected Trump to win, and there's many people that think the elections were rigged, right? Actually, there's a lot of evidence there, but Kamala Harris didn't ask for a recount. Had she done that, it's possible Trump wouldn't even be the president. But given that, Trump is the president and he's changed U.S. foreign policy. And I'm curious if that means the EU and the United States will become competitors on the global stage in terms of selling weapons, right? And other things as well, other trade. Well, how is that going to affect trade in general and security? I'm just saying.
By adopting the draft, the General Assembly will also address the global impact of war and outline the areas where this impact has been particularly detrimental and where
we have situations just like Ukraine, Sudan, Congo, right? I wonder how that changes things now.
The engagement of all responsible nations would be crucial. In particular, there are global food security, energy security, the global economy, nuclear security and safety, and the environment, justice, and accountability. As we mark 3 years of this devastating Russia's full invasion against Ukraine, we call on all nations to stand firm and to take the side of the Charter, the side of the humanity, and the side of just and lasting peace. Peace through strength, as the aggressor would never stop while seeing weakness. Excellencies, Ukraine's commitment to the UN Charter's principle traces back to the first day of our organization. Now it may seem to be symbolic that it was a representative of Ukraine who chaired 80 years ago the committee responsible for drafting the preamble, purposes, and principles of the future charter at the UN Conference on International Organization in San Francisco in 1945. Unfortunately, we haven't yet reached the point where principles enshrined in the UN Charter are respected by all member states. And the Article 51 of the Charter is just a matter of history.
You know, it's interesting because it seems like Donald Trump, I don't know if a lot of MAGA people or Republicans or people that voted for Trump, if they consider the fact that, Trump could actually start World War III himself. Have they considered that thought? I'm just curious.
Definitely not, as my country has been compelled to exercise its inherent right to self-defense under the above-mentioned Article 51 following unprovoked, mean, brutal, genocidal war. While persisting in defending our country until the threat is over, we strive for peace. Peace that will give the world another chance to live according to the rules, when all nations, regardless of the size of geography, will equally enjoy their sovereign rights, rather than depend upon the mercy of more powerful. This is the spirit that should guide us during the vote on the draft resolution, advancing a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in Ukraine.
It's going to be interesting because if the rules don't apply here, then it's likely they won't apply anywhere else by default.
I'm confirmed that it will be a vote for peace, for the UN Charter, and for each member state. I urge you to vote in favor of Ukraine's draft resolution. Thank you so much.
I thank the Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs of Ukraine. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United States to introduce draft resolution A/ES-11.
What is this? This is the U.S. draft? Okay,
11.
I don't want to hear that. Let's go to the Russian rep here.
Господин председатель.
Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, today we are witnessing historic events. Not every generation gets a chance to see them. In front of our eyes, the multipolar world is taking its outlines. The world that should have come into being 30 years ago at the end of the Cold War, which put a line under the ideological confrontation between the Soviet Union and the West. At the time, the world was full of hope.
Notice he mentioned the Cold War. That was his first reference. And it's very telling because they really do frame the world that way from back then. A lot of the thinking they apply and approach is really Russia projecting like what they lost while losing the Cold War, which means they're still talking about stuff that's 50 years old. The rest of the world has moved on and they don't see that,
For a better future, hope for cooperation between key actors for the interests of the whole mankind, ending of world, and creating a new indivisible system of security where former foes would become allies, and we work on international problems together. Unfortunately, at the time, that logic did not come to the fore, and the ideology of cooperation was gradually replaced by the philosophy of the zero-sum game. This was not our choice, and we have warned many a time about the dangers this kind of logic contains within itself. As a result, the world ended up on the brink of a third world war because of what the Western countries are doing, namely the anti-Russian project called Ukraine, which is taking place at our borders. Its key milestone was the anti-constitutional coup in Kiev in February 2014, as a result of which with Western assistance, a loud minority came to power. And this minority has the ideals of extreme nationalism and Russophobia. It is intolerant to a different opinion, to everything Russian, to the canonical Orthodox faith.
So this is, you can see how entrenched Russia is with this ethnic problem, right? It's so telling. It's so telling.
Glorifies the accomplices of Hitler's executioners who, during the World War II, killed hundreds of thousands of Jews, Roma, Poles, Russians, and Ukrainians. This regime launched a brutal war against their Russian-speaking compatriots in the eastern of the country, trying to eliminate their identity and replace them with.
So Russia, a long story short, Russia invaded Ukraine and have more territory because whatever his rationale is, he's giving the rationale for why they invaded.
The ideas of an all-out Ukrainian nationalism. This way, Ukraine itself launched the mechanism of a self-destruction by hatred, intolerance. This could have stopped by the Minsk.
The Ukrainians, they started it by having a hatred and intolerance for Russians, a Russophobia. So what's Russia's response? Invade Ukraine.
Agreements which were endorsed by the Security Council 10 years ago, exactly. But
it's basically what he's doing is empire splaining.
Instead of implementing them, the Kiev regime, with the patronage of the Western sponsors, decided, as we all know today, decided to undermine the agreements and at the same time arming itself and preparing for a war with Russia. The citizens of Ukraine tried to stop these mechanisms again when 3/4 of them in May 2019 voted for the new Ukrainian president, Vladimir Zelensky.
So again, this is the explanation for why they invaded and took more land even after invading before. Now they've invaded a second time.
Who promised peace on the eastern part of the country, promised to protect the Russian language and the rights of the Russian-speaking citizens, promised to end the glorification of Nazi accomplices, and to restore good neighborly relations with Russia. Unfortunately, when he became president, he treacherously turned the country back to its earlier suicidal and inhumane course. All this time, Russia, on its part, showed patience, restraints, did not give in to the provocations from Kiev and its Western sponsors.
But we invaded.
And we kept stating very clearly at the same time that we were not going to give up on the Russian people. We will not allow them to be persecuted or to have the
So we invaded.
Identity changed, to be changed. There was another red line for us, and that was Ukraine's membership in NATO. That created an unacceptable.
So this was another red line, but the first one was the ethnic dispute, the ethnic issues in Ukraine. They wanted to invade and save people from. But then the second issue was about what?
Changed, to be changed. There was another red line for us, and
another red line. What's the new red line? This is not the first red line. This is the second red line. Okay.
That was Ukraine's membership in NATO. That created an unacceptable.
That was probably the number one issue.
Military strategic risks for Russia. And we're trying to sort it out peacefully with Kiev and Washington and Brussels. No one listened.
Yeah, sort it out peacefully by invading.
To us, no one took us seriously. And it was only when 3 years ago it became
It was only when we invaded. 3 years ago.
Absolutely seriously. And it was only when 3 years ago no one listened.
It was only 3 years ago when we invaded.
To us, no one took us seriously. And it was only when 3 years ago it became absolutely clear that both of the red lines were going to imminently crossed by Ukraine, we had to start the
invasion. We had to start the invasion then.
Special military operation, stating clearly what its goals were. From the very first day of the operation at the same time, we kept talking that we stand ready to arrive at the special military operations goals through peaceful means. And that, in fact, that would be our preference. Today, the Kiev
While invading,
regime
that
is
would be our preference. While invading, though, our preference would be to not invade, but while invading, we kept saying that would be our preference.
on the brink of a crushing military defeat and continues sacrificing tens of thousands of Ukrainian people and women. Most of them have to be mobilized by force. For Zelensky and his clique, who usurped power and who refused in May last year to conduct elections in violation of Ukraine's constitution, they find it's unacceptable to have any talk about peace unless they're on the basis of the ultimatum and the provisions from the Zelensky formula, which has no relation with what's happening on the battlefield. And their maniacal thrust to inflict a strategic defeat on Russia, and egged on by some Western sponsors, the UK first and foremost. This former actor rejected the Istanbul agreements in April 2022, which had already been initiated, and also passed a law banning himself and his colleagues to have a negotiation with Russian authorities. Over the past 3 years, Ukraine received hundreds of billions of dollars of support. The country kept receiving weapons and mercenaries and intelligence data. In other words, the Ukraine became a private military company of sorts, fighting for Western geopolitical interests. And the conflict had become a classic proxy war by Russia against the countries of
All of this while they're invading. They're still invading. They're still doing it right now while he's speaking. This is just, again, this was their narrative, and they've been spitting this narrative for quite some time.
of NATO. Despite that, the Ukrainian army
So anyone can invade anybody. So who's going to invade the U.S. then, according to this logic? Can Canada invade the U.S. now because the U.S. has ethnic problems? Can Mexico invade the U.S.? Can Mexico invade the U.S. because the U.S. has ethnic problems? Can it? You guys, oh my goodness. I mean, I'm just saying this, you have to apply what he's saying also to the U.S. and ask, why would the U.S. support this logic when it's in fact supporting its own invasion if it applies that same logic?
army suffered catastrophic losses, and the capitulation of the Kiev regime is a matter of time. And we have said this many times, including this hall. Trying to drag the Western countries at any cost in confrontation with Russia. In August of last year, Zelensky started a suicidal aggression against a peaceful Russian region in the Kursk Oblast. As a result,
peaceful, the country, they're invading Russia, and he's saying that the response is starting a war with peaceful people.
As we know today from witnesses and Ukrainian soldiers who were captured, hundreds of peaceful citizens were killed and tortured. And the Ukrainian occupiers were involved in looting, violence, and pillaging. The expectation was that Russia was going to react to this equally brutally, and the public opinion will once again take the side of Kiev. This similarly to what was being done by the crude provocation in Bucha, whose investigation, by the way, is being slow-walked by the Kiev regime. The Kursk misadventure of Zelensky, as you know, was futile. It only accelerated the collapse on the Eastern Front, where Ukraine is lacking resources. They were being burned.
I want to speed it up a little bit.
The Kursk Oblast. Today, the Ukrainian army controls little more than 1/3 of the original territory there and is suffering horrifying losses. In parallel to that, the Russian army is moving forward in Donbass, Zaporozhskaya, and Kherson Oblast, the oblast which became part of Russia in the fall of 2022 as a result of a referendum. Every day, we learn new names of liberated.
So he basically admits that Russia is invading, but they're just saying they're doing it because of ethnic reasons. And they want the ethnic problems to cease. So Russia's invading until that happens. Right, even right now. This is sick.
places. And unfortunately, new horrifying figures of Ukrainian army losses or other cannon fodder, which Zelensky turned it into. The new regions of Russia are seeing hundreds of thousands of people arriving from Ukraine. And this disproves the Ukrainian propaganda statement that people, their people hate the Russians. When we've stated this clearly, we're not fighting for territories, we're fighting for people. As we all know, the hopelessness of Zelensky regimes recently have become obvious also to the main sponsor of the Kiev junta, the United States. Republican administration, led by President Trump, finally saw the real face of the expired Ukrainian president and realized that he is not at all interested in having peace in this country because he's clinging to power with everything that he has, is fearful of democratic elections where he has no chance of winning. He's not interested in anything else, and he's ready to sacrifice the entire people of Ukraine and its natural resource in order to hold on to his power.
When was the Putin has been in power for how many years? Let me see here. How many years has Putin been in power in Russia? Let me see here. These guys are talking about democracy. Vladimir Putin has been in power in Russia for about 25 years, starting in 1999. His rule has been through different roles. Prime Minister from 1999 to 2000, appointed by Boris Yeltsin. Damn, that goes back. President from 2000 to 2008, served 2 terms. Prime Minister from 2008 to 2012, switched roles with Dmitry something due to term limits. President from 2012 to now. And he is talking about what? An election in Ukraine?
Information starting up to the fore about the unfortunate corruption in Ukraine, which has blossomed under Zelensky. Stealing of Western assistance and the reselling on the black market.
He's gaslighting now.
Of weapons supplies, hundreds of
He must be trying to give Donald Trump some ammunition.
billions of dollars worth, and the blood-curdling instances of human rights violations, for which the Ukrainians nicknamed their country the Zelensky concentration camp. The number of those who want to leave the Ukraine.
I mean, this is just pure propaganda. And but we're going to hear other people speak after him.
In order to avoid prosecution and avoid going to the front is extraordinarily high, but the key potentate does not allow people from the country. It's clear that under these conditions where we have in Kiev a former comedian, is very worried by direct negotiations, direct talks between Russia and the United States about the means of settling the Ukrainian crisis and removing the reasons which led to its existence, which would drastically improve the international situation. The European countries are also worried by that. They've spent years helping the Kiev clique uncovered its crimes, and they nurtured Russophobia. They try to ignore the.
They nurtured Russophobia. Listen to this.
Countries are also worried by that. They've drastically improved the international situation. The European countries are also worried by that. They've spent years helping the Kiev clique uncovered its crimes, and they nurtured Russophobia.
They nurtured Russophobia. I mean, oh my goodness, this is just pure. While we're invading, you created Russophobia. It's like, this is what authoritarians do. They invade. And when people complain and get Russophobia, then all of a sudden they're like, hey, it's Russophobia. You can't discriminate against us, the invader.
They try to ignore the fact that the wind has changed and there is a clear demand for peace now. And the impediment to that is the Kiev usurp.
Peace. There's a clear, people want peace. while we're invading.
and its accomplices. They're not at the rudder anymore, but these pathetic peacekeepers are at a loss. But
These peacekeepers are pathetic because we are invading.
you continue to lecture the rest of the world about how we're supposed to live in this beautiful garden. Colleagues, the draft by EU and Ukraine today is directly related to this bubble.
He's saying this while they're invading. This is insane. It's like no mention. It's almost like he doesn't realize that they're still invading Ukraine.
It is slapped together by this grouping, which is trying to ignore realities on the ground on the one hand and include into the key elements from the Zelensky formula, the failed Bergenstock processes, and on the other hand, trying to cover it up at the same time, round it off to make sure that the countries of the global south do not see such unpleasant undertakings. They are very interested in figures today to present them as support of the Kiev regime and prolong its agony for some time. But it will be the everyday Ukrainians who will pay for this with their lives. Think about this. Many of us ask us about what would be the right way to vote, choosing between the two texts, the EU-Ukrainian text and the American text. Well, everyone who's going to press the button during the voting process today has the chance. You either play along with Zelensky and his sponsors and support their incantations, which are divorced of realities, or make a choice in favor of practical, realistic steps which can stop the hostilities in Ukraine in the very near future. Don't get deceived and make the right choice here. The second draft resolution was submitted by our American colleagues, and this text is, of course, a step in the right direction to make sure that this initiative is fully in line with the understanding.
Was submitted by Trump.
Arrived at during the Russian and American context at the highest and high levels. We introduced an amendment to that about the need to eliminate the root causes of the Ukrainian crisis. And this, by the way, was mentioned by President Trump several times. This would help with its lasting settlement, as is proposed.
To remove when the crisis started. What?
The root cause.
The root causes. Remove the root causes of the conflict between Ukraine and Russia from the draft.
And high levels. We introduced an amendment to that about the need to eliminate the root causes of the Ukrainian crisis. And this, by the way, was mentioned by President Trump several times. This would help with its lasting settlement, as is proposed by the United States in their text.
This is the same thing as like, trying to get critical race theory out of the U.S. or in things like Black history out of U.S. curriculum, right? They want to eliminate that inside of the U.S. and that's been a MAGA thing. That's something Trump is DEI now. They call it DEI, but that's part of the DEI. It's crazy.
And we expect, we trust that hope the support of all sensible delegations.
This is the same thing with Russia.
In this room. As regards the amendments from some states of the European
very Marxist concept too.
Union amendments to the American text, well, they clearly
communist concept
replace the essence of that text. If they were to pass, then we will have, instead of something that's full of common sense, we will have an ultimatum in the spirit of the Bergenstock process, and it will.
We will have something very communistic.
Distance the settlement of the conflict
fascist
away from us, and will be not different from politicized products during this emergency special sessions. We shall be voting against them and urge all member states to do the same.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of France to introduce draft resolution A/ES-11/L.13, L.14 and L.15.
Mr. President, I have the honor of presenting on behalf of France and the 23 members of the European Union and the United Kingdom 3 amendments to draft resolution A/ES-11/L11 submitted by the United States of America, which our countries will not be able to support in its current form. The amendments are based on simple messages which reflect the real situation in Ukraine, that of a war of aggression led by Russia against its neighbor. The first amendment replaces the words Russian Federation-Ukraine conflict with full-scale invasion of Ukraine by the Russian Federation. The Second Amendment reaffirms our commitment to the sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. The Third Amendment calls for a just, lasting and comprehensive peace in Ukraine, which respects the United Nations Charter and the principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity. We call upon all member states to vote in favor of these three amendments, which recall that in this conflict there is an aggressor state and a state subject to that aggression. And this marks our attachment to peace and a just and lasting peace, which must take as its basis the United Nations Charter and international law. Voting in favor of these amendments is a vote for the United Nations Charter and its principles. It is a vote for international law. Thank you, Mr. President. I would now like to make a statement in my national capacity. We're meeting today 3 years, day for day, after the beginning of the large-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia to call for a global, just and lasting peace in Ukraine. 3 years ago, Russia launched a brutal and unjustified war of aggression against a sovereign state, Ukraine, which was not threatening it in any way, and it already was illegally occupying part of its territory, and that since 2014. In doing this, Russia violated and continues to flagrantly violate the United Nations Charter and the principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity that we all share. Russia...
A lot of people think that this is only about Ukraine and that it's not about sovereignty, but for me, it's always been about sovereignty, the basics of it, because what is sovereignty? What do you get with sovereignty? You get your country, obviously. And without it, you don't have a country. And the United States, typically would err on that side. Well, now it's pulling back from it. And a lot of people didn't think this could affect other parts of the world. But what does this mean for you and how the new world order will be shaped? Should sovereignty be an issue for the rest of the world? And if it is, where do you stand on the issue of Ukraine when sovereignty is there in Europe? When it's a question of sovereignty, where do you stand in Europe? And do you take the same stance where you live?
For 3 years now has been inflicting unbearable suffering on the civilian population of Ukraine. Millions of Ukrainian men and women today are either refugees or have been displaced. Russia is bombing indiscriminately towns and civilian energy infrastructure in Ukraine. This is a risk for the security and safety of nuclear establishments. It is worsening the food crisis throughout the world. It is flouting international humanitarian law. It is guilty of war crimes and even crimes against humanity. The authors of these crimes must be held to account. France will pursue its support for international and Ukrainian jurisdictions, as well as for all of the mechanisms of inquiry aimed at establishing responsibility for the crimes committed by Russia in Ukraine. Mr. President, Russia must cease its war of aggression in Ukraine. Since the 16th of March 2022, the International Court of Justice has demanded that Russia immediately suspend its military operations. Since the 24th of February 2022, this is now the 8th time that this General Assembly is meeting in order to condemn the Russian aggression and to call for the respect for the territorial integrity of Ukraine. France is committed to a resolution of the conflict. Our authorities are at the highest levels and are working on this. We want a global peace that is just and lasting, based on the UN Charter and international law. Peace which does not recompense the aggressor, which does not tread underfoot the rights of the party under attack. Peace which respects the sovereignty, territorial integrity and independence of Ukraine. This assembly for 3 years now, with its resolutions on the situation in Ukraine, has been the moral compass of this organization, the guarantor of an international rules-based order based on the sovereign equality between states. Where the Security Council has failed, the General Assembly has defended the law. Today, once again, it can contribute to laying out peace towards solid, just, and long-term peace in accordance with our common rules. It is in this spirit, dear colleagues, that we give our full support to the draft resolution tabled today by Ukraine. It is balanced and it is consensual. It is the result of a genuine process of negotiation that was inclusive and transparent. We call upon all member states to support it. Since the beginning of the aggression, Ukraine has been defending itself in accordance with Article 51 of the Charter. It wants peace. It wants this aggression to cease. It wants to participate in any efforts to resolve the conflict. It is right. A resolution to the conflict that will be decided without Ukraine and without Europe will not be a lasting peace. It would establish the primacy of force over law by legitimizing the claim of spheres of influence in disregard for the sovereign equality between states. It would set the stage for the wars of tomorrow. The support of the General Assembly for the Ukrainian resolution is not just another vote. The United Nations General Assembly must stay the course, that of law, that of the sovereignty of states and respect for their territorial integrity, that of responsibility and
I don't think people yet understand outside of this area what that means. Or even Americans, like, what does this mean for South America? What does this mean for the rest of the world? This issue over sovereignty, and they were very right to mention this, but I don't think people always interpret what that means. It means right now the EU is becoming more militarized itself, right? More investment in weapons, more investment in security, more investment in trade, right? The diplomatic situation has changed, so things may change on the ground in other areas as well. And what will that mean if everyone follows the standard that Russia and Trump have put forth to the world? What would that mean?
that of justice. I thank you.
I thank.
Now, this got voted down. This got voted down, sadly. And we're about to see what that actually means.
Changing stance on the war in Ukraine has been highlighted at the United Nations, where its UN envoy voted twice alongside Russia. First, the two countries opposed a European drafted resolution condemning Moscow's actions and supporting Ukraine's territorial integrity. Then they backed a US resolution calling for an end to the conflict, but containing no criticism of Russia. It comes as the French president, Emmanuel Macron, says a truce between Ukraine and Russia could be agreed in the coming weeks, following talks with President Trump in the White House.
Exactly. And this was happening along the side of this meet, 2 days ago, essentially. So while they're talking, people are voting down this thing. And this is Trump. Look at his face.
US-Europe relations. He is the first European leader to visit since Trump's inauguration, ahead of the arrival of the UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer on Thursday. Meanwhile, in France, 2 people have been arrested in relation to an arson attack on the Russian consulate in Marseille on Monday. Prosecutors called the pair major individuals. In Ukraine, air raid alerts have been sounded again today. Overnight, Poland deployed aircraft to secure its airspace after Russia launched strikes targeting western Ukraine. BBC's Joe Inwood reports.
You see?
In northern Ukraine,
Russia is attacking new territories in Ukraine, western Ukraine, essentially, new areas. And while they're in the middle, of not agreeing on any level about the peace, what's it going to be based on, and how the drafting, the language will be, the actual agreements, So the UN, there's been no resolution in the UN. It's just been knocked down by the US, essentially. And this is not looking good. While at the same time, Trump says that he's okay with the EU sending forces into Ukraine, right? He's okay with that, but then on the international scale, he's kind of, I don't know. It to me, it seems like a lack of leadership on Donald Trump's part, like almost like he's in favor of more war. And again, what are the international implications of this? Could it be the beginning of World War III? Donald Trump setting the ground for that? Russia setting the ground for that? Yeah, let's see.
Troops are still being trained, even as the war enters its 4th year.
If you want to pass your challenge and get as soon as
The cost being huge, but this country appears to be holding on. It's done so through the effort of men like Evhen, who says Ukraine is making more of its own weapons and will continue to do so.
It's good to get help from abroad.
So right now, the EU is still sponsoring Ukraine. And I think to some degree, the US is also still, right?
Help won't last forever. It's here today. It might be gone tomorrow.
And that point has been brought home by the dramatic change in US policy. Once Ukraine's greatest ally, Donald Trump has started repeating Moscow lies about Kiev starting the war. And so yesterday's visit of French President Emmanuel Macron to the White House had extra significance.
Again, the relationship's been very special with France and very special with this gentleman on my right.
They've always got on well, but there were bits of disagreement.
Europe is loaning the money to Ukraine. They get their money back.
No, in fact, to be frank, we paid 60% of the total effort, and it was through, like the US, loans, guarantee, grants, and we provided real money, to be clear.
And that was not the only crack in the transatlantic alliance.
We need to reconfirm that the aggression should be condemned and discredited, not rewarded.
In an extraordinary development.
All right, folks, I'm out of here. Peace, everybody. Have a good one.
Found themselves backing different resolutions on Ukraine, with America on the same side as Russia, Belarus, and North Korea. While in Kyiv, Ukraine's remaining allies took part in events to commemorate 3 years of war and talks aimed at ensuring the sacrifices they've made will not have been in vain. Joe Inwood, BBC News.
Well, our Ukraine correspondent James Waterhouse gave more details about the reaction from Kiev to the talks between Macron and Trump.
Well, we've had no specific reaction to a meeting between Emmanuel Macron and Donald Trump here. Instead, the focus has been on Ukraine's own rallying cry to its remaining allies as America throws the gauntlet down, really, challenges Europe to try and step up where it is less willing to do so. We're going to see Sir Keir Starmer follow suit, where he will visit Donald Trump in the White House to try and bridge a widening gap between Europe and America. So here, instead, we have seen a continuation, really, of military pledges.
Next, tomorrow, we will find out if Zelensky comes to the White House to sign any agreement. Peace, y'all.
An announcement of new sanctions against Russia by the likes of the European Union, and I think it's a departure from the alignment we're seeing, certainly with the United Nations votes. We've seen the softening of language from Washington. Here we are still seeing a country still at war, and its European allies trying to adopt as strong a stance as possible.
James Waterhouse there. Joining me now is political commentator, author and journalist Christine O'Krent. Thanks for being with us, Christine. It was fascinating to watch the public interactions yesterday with Macron and Trump. Just first of all, what did you make of all the body language, the precise language from what we saw?
Well, I think there was some effort on both sides to make it look, fairly friendly. Hostile confrontation. But it is obvious that the transatlantic gap is widening, and there was that very interesting moment where Donald Trump, as usual, being carried away by his alternative facts, said, oh, you know, Europeans are getting their money back from Ukraine. And then Macron very calmly put his hand on Trump's arm and said, well, no, actually, no. Europeans paid 60% of the aid provided to Ukraine, and loans are the same as the US. And that was the only moment where Trump was sort of slightly off balance. Not that it mattered much, because obviously he kept on repeating that the old style American diplomacy is over and he wants to do things afresh again. And as your correspondent pointed out, what is absolutely unbelievable is at the same time the US voting at the General Assembly alongside with Russia, Iran, and North Korea.
I mean, there is though potentially a deal coming, according to Trump, and quite a shift if what he said yesterday is true, that Russia would accept EU peacekeepers, because that is not what Sergei Lavrov said at the Saudi meeting, after the Saudi meeting with Marco Rubio.